Kelly Taylor Ryan, and this is Mainly Unspoken. Today our show is about the education, the public educational system, and our guest is Charlotte Iserbyt. She's a former U.S. Senior former advisor for the Department of Education, and she wrote a book called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you very much.
So did I get that right? You were a former senior advisor.
Senior policy advisor, and it's the U.S. Department of Education.
The U.S. Department
under
of Education.
President Reagan.
Okay, glad to get that straightened
Right.
out. The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. Why did you write this book?
I started researching education in the early 70s after having returned from Europe. Overseas, actually, I had been in the Foreign Service for at least 18 years. Some of that was spent after I got married and living in Belgium with my husband, but I'd lived abroad for pretty much 18 years. And I came back to the United States and put my children in the public school in Camden, Maine. And I was absolutely shocked to see what was happening. And I don't think I was alone. That good public school teachers, older teachers, were also very shocked at the things that they were being required to do. And I kept asking questions such as, well, one very interesting little exercise that was in the New Social Studies textbook, which was called World of Mankind, published by Follett, was for the teacher to take the little tots in first grade through town, whatever town it is in the United States, wherever, and ask them to identify the houses in town, the big houses and the little houses. And what do you think they eat in the big house? What do they eat in the little house? And I thought, what is this?
The point being, what?
This is, to create the class system, class warfare, really. And I knew that because I'd lived in socialist countries, so I thought, what is going on here? So I went to the school board meeting, not realizing that I was going to be, I caused quite an uproar, and they hauled me up the flagpole as a censor, because I said, what does this have to do with education? I don't really understand. And I realized then that things had changed. And so then I began to check on other things other than social studies, and I saw that they were planning on easing out the grammar. They were planning on getting rid of A, B, C, D, all these things that were quite traditional and had worked very well. The audience has to understand that the United States had the finest education system in the world until probably 1960. And so all of a sudden, and I went out of the country in when did I leave? 1953. And so I left when we had this great system of education. And
because they were sticking with the basics.
Oh, yes.
They were teaching people how to read, how to write,
That's right.
how to do research.
Yes.
And then you come back, and all of a sudden, instead of focusing on the basics, they're taking kids down the street and saying, well, what do the people in this big house eat? What do the people in this small?
That's right.
And the point, but what was the point that they would tell the citizens? Not class warfare.
Well, that's a very good point you're making. It is, they would say, well, this is a world of mankind. The children have got to understand that there are all different groups of types of income, people who are poor, people in other countries, and later on they were even having the children eating rice for breakfast. And a lot of, the audience saw this. They'd have the children role-playing starving children in Ethiopia or wherever. This is to change their values. The whole purpose of this kind of education, which really is socialization, it's I call it socialism education, really, redistribution of wealth, etc., is to change our children through the schools so that they will be very comfortable living in a socialist world management system. And very clear, the teacher's manual for this particular social studies textbook said, I don't know that they do that, they're that clear about it anymore. It said it was based on a humanistic curriculum, and they defined that. And they said basically it was children had to be educated to be tolerant of all religions, all lifestyles, They should understand other forms of government, basically.
But that's not a bad thing.
No, it sounds good, doesn't it?
It sounds very good.
Yes, but the point was that they were not emphasizing the United States Constitution. They were not emphasizing rights, absolute moral values at all, right and wrong, which had been emphasized in all curriculum ever since this country was founded. And even under the public school system, you know, we had the Ten Commandments hanging in the classroom. No more of that, because you've got to be tolerant of everybody's viewpoint, and everybody means the whole world. So the education from...
So it's taking our culture away from us.
Absolutely taking your culture away. So I became very concerned, and I wrote letters to the paper, and I even ran for school board. I finally got elected after 3 tries. And I did manage to get a lot of the very bad programs out, the values clarification, survival games. They were putting them in where the children decide who's going to be allowed to live and who's going to die, who's going to be in the lifeboat, who's going to be allowed in the bomb shelter. Or, they'd be given a list, a priest, a pregnant woman.
Some people would say that's critical thinking, teaching them how to think.
Well, you're correct. And critical thinking, you see, was the label that was given to the values clarification after the tremendous controversy over values clarification. And it's the same thing. In fact, Lenin coined the word critical thinking.
Is that right?
Yes, and it's non-absolutist thinking that evolves, and it's the dialectic where you have the thesis and the antithesis. For instance, it's wrong to steal. That's the thesis. The antithesis is it's okay. And so you come to the synthesis is sometimes it's okay. And you can do this with anything: stealing, murder, abortion, whatever. And
so there's no right or wrong.
You end up with a synthesis where sometimes it's okay, and then you just keep moving, you know, towards the non-absolutist viewpoint, and you sort of end up where it's okay all the time. Abortion is a very good issue to take on that score. I mean, we've finally gotten to the point where it's just okay, huh? But there used to be a time when sometimes it's okay. So anyway, the textbook was very clear that the goal of this particular social studies program was to, at a very early age, start to change the children's attitudes and values. Really brainwashing. This is what it is. And I recognized that because I had lived in socialist countries, traveled in communist countries. And so this retired teacher came to me. Really nice woman. She was so important in my life, and in everybody's life for that matter. I mean, the book probably never would have happened if it hadn't been for this retired teacher. And she said, "Charlotte, you're absolutely right. I want you to go for some in-service training down east in Searsport, Maine." And she said, "I'm going to pay." And I said, "Well, oh, all right." She gave me a $100 bill. That's a lot back in 1973. Mm-hmm. And I went. And all these people seemed very normal, nice teachers, you know, look like your best friend, your neighbor. And the guy who was running it, the facilitator, had this great big textbook that we all got that free. It came part of the package. And it was called Innovations in Education, a Change Agent's Guide.
A Change Agent's
Guide.
Okay. And who was putting this on again?
This was it was a group in Maine. I can't remember the name of the education group it was, but they sponsored it. I don't know that it was even the Department of Education. But the textbook was published and paid for by the United States Department of Education. Mm-hmm. And it was put together by a professor, Ronald Havelock, at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And basically what we were taught was that we were being taught to be change agents, how to go into a community as a teacher, or even some parents are selected, you know, who are all gung-ho for this new stuff. Well, it's not new anymore. They were putting it in the early 70s. Much of it was funded under Lyndon Johnson's Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was passed in 1965, where they changed education from academics basically to behavior modification, which is necessary for the planned economy for school to work. So that's just an aside, and we'll go into that later.
That's how you change people.
Absolutely.
Right. And control them.
And control them. And so he taught us how to identify, say they want to put in a sex education program or a death education program or whatever, and they know that the community isn't ready for that. And so we were taught how to identify the resistors, the potential resistors.
The people that would disagree.
Oh yeah, like me. I mean, it was extraordinary to be trained to identify myself because I was a big resistor.
But you didn't let them know that.
Oh, no, they didn't know. They thought I was one of them. And so I just was, you know, my hair, my scalp tingled. I thought, what is going on? You know, this is what they do in this Nazi Germany. They do this in communist countries or fascist countries. They identify the resistors. And they keep records on them, and they isolate them, and sometimes they end up putting them you know where. And Alexander Solzhenitsyn was a resistor. He spent 8 years in the Gulag. And I thought, whoa. And the resistors were these great people, and I only know Maine for that matter, and they were terrific at the time. And they were taking a stand against these programs. And many of them were saying, even if they didn't know what they were, saying, look, wait a minute, we don't have enough time in the school day for reading, writing, arithmetic, history, etc. What are you doing bringing in all of these programs? Sex ed, drug ed, suicide ed, critical thinking ed, values clarification, all these things that, which interestingly enough, I just while we're talking about this, I have to show you this monstrous book. All of these programs that had nothing to do with education. And I want your audience, is it upside down? Oh, pace setter, okay, yes. Pace setters in innovation. Now this is a, what do you think, about 3-inch thick?
Yes.
Yeah, This was published in 1968, and it's a result of the passage of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which I mentioned, brainwashing, behavior modification. These are all programs in here to brainwash our children.
Now, what are the teachers saying about this? Or are they being brainwashed too?
Oh, the poor teachers at the time, if they didn't like it, there was a way to get rid of them. What they did, though, rather than automatically, because if they had tenure, you can't get rid of them, they would put them through the training. All this in-service training the poor teachers had to go through. But this is an extraordinary book. I mean, it's just, you just take a look at these programs. They're all throughout here. Value change. They even had school buses that they were playing tapes.
Subliminal tapes?
So, yeah.
You're kidding.
No, they were just tapes that were to help to change the children's values. I never heard any of them, but the program is in here. And the mastery learning programs were in here, master teachers programs, all the programs going in now, global individualized education programs, etc. So going back to...
So it's taking the power away from the parents.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But the parents don't even know that's what's happening.
No, and they trust. They're so trusting. So anyway, I went through that, and then we were also taught how to identify the important people in the community, really good people who want to help and volunteer to be on task forces to implement these things, whether they're Chamber of Commerce, the Rotary, Garden Club, and these poor people have been used. We were trained how to identify them, go to them, get them to take a position in the community because they were highly thought of, people would listen to them.
And what was the mission? What did they tell you was the mission of being a change agent?
Oh, to bring about change, that the world, if I heard that, my superintendent in Camden was a change agent himself, and I got along pretty well with him because he knew I knew.
Right.
In fact, he said to me after I went through the training, he said, why did you go to that training? He said, I give that training too. You could have taken it from me. And I said to him, Tom, I didn't have to take it from you. All I have to do is sit opposite you at a school board meeting.
Yeah.
Because I know how you all operate. And it is so sad that the education establishment at the highest levels, I'm not talking about teachers, has decided that they have to manipulate the people in order to get the programs.
But why would a superintendent in Maine, a very small community, want to change his community? What is he getting at?
Oh, well, no, he's really not getting anything, but he's a professional change agent. And I might point out that Maine is very important for this. Maine has had the National Training Laboratories in Bethel, Maine ever since the 50s. And people come from all over the world to go through training. They could be doctors, lawyers, ministers, teachers. They go there for training to become a change agent.
Here in Maine?
Yes, and this is in Bethel, Maine, and we ski in Bethel, Maine, and you know, we ski in Sunday River, and I've been over there in the summer, but they're usually closed whenever I go. But it's an old estate that was converted, and the people involved in this were deeply involved in intelligence in the beginning with the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, prior to the Central Intelligence Agency, and they understand brainwashing. And
so who's in charge of all this? You're telling me, if I'm hearing this correctly.
Yes, the National Education Association, the United States Department of Education. You have to remember that the U.S. Department of Ed, this will come as a surprise to many people, does fund the National Education Association for various purposes. Not all the time, but it is funded by the National Education, by the department. You know, so this has been going on for a long, long time. And so anyway, I got in there, and when I saw that, I just, as an American, and I just really was sort of an apple mom and apple pie, red, white, and blue, you know, Memorial Day parades. I was brought up that way by my family. My father was a lawyer. My mother volunteered for everything. And I just was appalled. I've never, ever gotten over it. I got on the White Horse in 1975, and I've never, that poor horse, I've never gotten off that white horse, and I will not until they stop this, until they stop what is actually brainwashing. And
okay,
parents,
but you have to go back a little bit, okay, because you're losing me here a little bit, okay? You're saying they're brainwashing, okay? You're saying these people that are experts in brainwashing is using the Department of Education to brainwash our children.
Yes.
What are they after? Why are they doing it?
Well, if you want to move a country from a free individualistic economy,
which we have.
Yes, or had.
Or had, okay.
To a planned economy, you have to do it through the schools. You have to dumb down and brainwash, change the attitudes and values. You have to completely, social engineering has to go on constantly, and many teachers know what I'm talking about. And people are going to say, well, when did this start? And who on earth ever did this? Why would a plan like that be allowed to be carried out?
That's right.
Well, then you have to go back to 1934, which I will do, and we have to go to the three-pronged fork, okay? So I do think that the watershed year, although you can go back to the early part of the century when the Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegie Corporation were deeply involved in education, and that it was decided then that Carnegie would deal with the international part and Rockefeller domestic. But then we moved on to 1934, and this was after World War I, and there were these educators were, many of them, going back and forth to Russia, very admiring of the new system in Russia, the communistic system. And they wanted to put it in here in the United States. And so the Carnegie Corporation, that had always been involved in, you know, trying to get us into world government after the League of Nations and all in 1917, they still had this goal. And of course, world government will be communism. I mean, it's really international socialism. That's what Lenin called it. So they've always wanted this. And
the Department of Education today is going along with that?
Yes, absolutely, yes. And so in 1934, the Carnegie Corporation produced, it took 4 years, they commissioned the American Historical Association to put together a study of the social studies. And they came up with lots of volumes, but I have one little volume, Conclusions and Recommendations for the Social Studies. And basically that little one is an original book. I wish I'd brought it with me. Too bad, but I don't even dare let it out of the house. It's so important. It called for changing the United States through the schools from a free individualistic economy to a socialist, collectivized, planned economy in the New World Order.
It says that in the book?
Yes.
And that book was written when?
In 1934.
By who?
It was the Carnegie Corporation paid for it. The American Historical Association put it together. And
can people get that book in the library?
No.
No? No?
No, they can't. But I have quotes in my book, you know, from it. But from that time on, Carnegie Corporation consistently, without any hesitation whatsoever, didn't run into any obstruction, poured its money, its tax-exempt money, which we make possible for them to have, into changing American education. They funded the, well, let's go on to the 1945. They're deeply involved. Alger Hiss was deeply involved with the Carnegie Corporation. He was a accused Soviet agent. They didn't get him on it, but they got him on libel. But most people do think that Alger Hiss was a Soviet agent. He was Carnegie. And they were very instrumental in getting the Elementary and Secondary Education Act passed, which, as I said before, changed education from knowledge, content-based, academic, to performance-based behavior. And from that time on, because that was necessary for what we're looking at now with school to work agenda is the planned economy is performance-based.
So they're training workers.
They're training
not thinkers, not leaders.
Exactly. So Carnegie, after that study, then we went to the world. We went into the United Nations, which of course was essential, and then at that time, you had a general, Brock Chisholm, a Canadian general psychiatrist, who was a very close friend of Alger Hiss's. And he gave a speech in 1945 to the World Health Organization, which basically recommended getting rid of the conscience.
Wow.
Yes. And he said we would do it through the schools. We would retrain the teachers to be little psychiatrists. And what happened was that the average American educator at that time was not about, in 1945, to even listen to something like that.
Right.
And so nothing happened until the watershed year, again, another watershed year, 1965, when the Elementary and Secondary Education Act passed, and we moved then from academics to behavior change. And the behavior science teacher education program was funded.
But how did Congress allow that to happen?
Well, you'll see in the book, John Ashbrook, who died, unfortunately, Congressman Ashbrook, who I dedicated the book to, he spelled it all out. He told the whole Congress exactly what it was. He said it is an international system they're looking at. They're going to change the behavior of the children. They're going to change the teachers' training. They're going to do everything. He told them everything.
And they didn't believe him?
No, they just let, well, you know what goes on.
Yes, I
It's
do.
still going on, right? So anyway, they passed that in 1965. The teachers were retrained. All of these horrible programs, right? By 1968, the money had gone into all of these programs to get rid of the conscience, basically. Drug ed, all these programs, parents, really, when you see education hanging on the end of drug education, sex education, critical thinking education, red flag. You don't have reading education, writing education, math education, or we didn't used to. When you see education hanging on the end of something, except for driver's ed, which I think is probably pretty neutral, that means watch it. Because those programs, I've never seen one of those programs that was based on absolutes, right and wrong.
But the parents of the children today have gone through that program. So
Yes.
they've already been brainwashed. So they're not going to believe
Well,
you.
yes, they do believe me. Many of them call, and when I do radio interviews, they'll call in and say, I went through all of that. I know exactly what you're talking about. And of course, the teachers know. And many teachers do not like that, did not ever want to do it. Behind closed doors, they did their own thing. Now they're not going to be able to get away with it because they're going to be required, due to the standards that are being set and the accountability, the whole what's going on in Washington now with the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act is nothing but brainwashing. And people, you hear standards and accountability and flexibility, all of this. Basically, the goal has nothing to do with academics. It has to do with training little, as you said, little workers, little worker bees, to have the right attitudes and values towards internationalism, giving up our sovereignty, the needs of the group versus the individual. You know, they have all the group grades now, and
Did they actually
cooperative
ever stop
learning.
talking about being a change agent, how to stop teaching people about basic civics, what the Constitution says, limitation of government? I mean, did they get into
No,
that?
I don't recall that, but I do know that I've seen I attend a lot of in-service things too, you know, So I have seen and heard, you know, how are we going to get away from, and that's in the book. Actually, there's a very interesting article in the New York Times in the early 70s about getting rid of the teaching of American history.
You're kidding.
Oh, no, not early 70s. New York Times article in the book. And it says that, yes, and we're not going to talk about George Washington anymore. We're going to focus on the world, because you have to get these world-minded students, or else they're going to rebel. If you want to put the Americans under a global management system or whatever it is, be very careful you don't teach them the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Don't let them have any history, because they are going to object when this system is taken away from them. But they won't now. You could take the Constitution away from the American people right now, and they wouldn't care, because they don't even know what it is. They don't know what it is.
Well, they don't know what it is.
It protects them. It protects their rights. The reading problem. If you're so dumbed down, if you can't read, I've always said you can't defend yourself.
That's right.
You can't do anything. I mean, you are really at a tremendous loss. You are totally handicapped, worse than losing both legs if you can't read. They can take you right through the schools, 12 years without reading, just total brainwashing through visual, a lot of visual aids now with technology.
So they're trying to make people weaker readers?
Oh, of course. Yes, that's why they had the whole language for so long.
Which is I always thought was very dumb.
Yeah, it is pretty dumb. I think that some teachers, a really good teacher with whole language and an understanding of the traditional phonics, I don't mean direct instruction, which is Skinner, the Skinner phonics, but a good teacher who understood phonics, well, could use a whole language program quite well, because there are some things about whole language I like, you know, where the children are really immersed in a lot of good literature. Sometimes it's not so good, and it depends on the teacher. But anyway, the dumbing down was absolutely deliberate, and you don't even have to go through all of the documents that I have in my book, but just ask yourself, why is it that last week the Senate voted in the House on the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and it comes to something like, I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's I think it's $100 billion. It's $100 billion a year. And we have children who can't. We're at the bottom of the list internationally, academically, and we're spending $100 billion. We will be, because it's reauthorized for 7 years. It's not quite that. I have to be fair, but with the interest that's going to be paid on the debt, yes, it will be. $100 billion a year. And you have homeschoolers and private schools that are doing it on $2,000 a year per pupil.
So we don't need to spend all that money.
We don't, but you see, the brainwashing is horribly expensive. And when we think that a program has failed, I mean, I saw all these programs in the U.S. Department of Education. Right? In fact, I was relieved of my duties for leaking a very important one. But when we think a program has failed, you and I, to the top educators, not the teachers, the top educators, it's successful, because that's what they want. And they take their orders not just from the U.S. Department of Ed. I know this because I was there. I know where we got our orders from.
Where?
The UN.
We get it from the UN?
Yes, and this is an international plan, and I just took something off my email today out of England. England is putting in the exact workforce training, the exact standards, the exact teach to the test, which no good teacher wants, teaching to the test. They're going to fire the teachers who won't teach to the test. I mean, and they're going to fire the teachers who don't get the results. What's interesting is if you go back to the late 1800s in England, in my book, they had a form of outcome-based education. And
this is what it's called?
Yeah, well, that's outcome-based education, because you're teaching to the narrow curriculum. Just really workforce training skills will be, or attitudes, certain attitudes, get along in a group.
They'll know one area and they won't know what else is going on.
And that we really ought to discuss, because people think school to work is probably like vocational education.
But it's not.
No, and it's not, and you don't start vocational education in kindergarten. And school to work is being started in kindergarten, where they're focusing on work and jobs, etc., and taking children to nursing homes, this, that, and all. And by 4th grade in some states, they're psychologically profiling the child, to find out, can you imagine in 4th grade, what he would be good at, what he should do in the future. And what they will start doing is they will apply the curriculum. It's called applied learning. And you might think as a mother or father that your child is taking a regular math program for 1st grade or 2nd grade. Let's say 4th grade. And you better find out, because your child's future may have already been identified.
So are you suggesting everyone take their kids out of public school and homeschool them?
Well, yeah, well, if possible, that certainly is a good idea, but a lot of parents, including myself, probably wouldn't. I don't think I would have been very good at homeschooling. But what I'm suggesting is that parents take their children out of the public school system, but there's a caveat there. They should find a good private school if they can, and homeschooling, of course, is good. But make sure that the private school that you select, whether it could be a Christian school or an independent, non-sectarian school, is not worse than the public school. I have found out from many parents who've done this that they want to put their children back in the public school. Now, they may have had a pretty good public school. At this point, there are some public schools that are still pretty good, but they won't be for long, because they are going to get rid of it. I don't want to go into ones in Maine, because I really, as I told you, I've got a lot of documents on Maine, but I decided that my efforts could be better spent on a national basis rather than getting deeply involved in Maine, because I would have become much too close to the problem and become very upset. Maine is leading the pack with the restructuring. That's all that I can say. And
they've been doing that since when?
Oh, yeah. Well, they've been doing it since the mid-20s, when this Augustus Thomas was named superintendent of schools in Maine, and he was a big internationalist. And he gave a speech to the National Education Association in regard to the need for using the schools to bring about world government. So he was...
Back in the 1800s,
No, this was in 1922.
1922,
I think. And so he was the head of the Carnegie Corporation, but he was part of that pack. It was a these gentlemen, and they were gentlemen at that time, and I think that well-meaning. I really believe after World War I, they all sort of fell for this idea that we never want to have another war again, and we're all going to have to get along, and we hear all this now too. And also that the Soviet Union, when it was first created in 1917, I believe it was 1917 that he may have given that speech, yeah. Yeah, huh? They thought that this was a good idea. They had been convinced at the university, Ivy League universities mostly, that the United States was so wealthy, and we should, be concerned for the poor. And we had a poor and rich in our country, the coal mines, and all this was going on. And so they were convinced that this was the way to go. And I don't want to attribute any really evil motives to them at that time. However, with Carnegie has held on to these motives for just too long, able to see the brutality of communism and understanding that, but still very deeply involved in pushing the agenda to the point where in 1958, Dwight Eisenhower, our president, signed agreements with the Soviet Union in every area imaginable, including education. Carnegie was involved in that. And then in 1985, they kept renewing all of these agreements. 85, President Ronald Reagan, and the Carnegie Corporation signed agreements with Gorbachev and with the Soviet Academy of Science to really basically merge the two systems. Oh, what a shock for people to hear that. Although right now they're heaving a great sigh of relief, because they're saying, oh, but Charlotte, communism is dead.
The Department of Education, is that constitutional?
No, it is not constitutional, and there is nowhere in the Constitution that it calls for a Department of Education. Anything not mentioned, as you know, in the Constitution as the role of the federal government is left to the states.
So when did the Department of Education come into being?
In 1978.
1978?
Yes, under Carter, under President Carter. He promised the NEA that if he could get their votes. And the interesting thing there was that the majority of teachers at the time did not want a U.S. Department of Education.
And why is that?
Oh, well, because they're smart. They know that this is going to control what they teach and how they teach. They don't want that. And but anyway, it was created. And then Ronald Reagan, who I just mentioned, signed the agreements with the Soviet Union. Those agreements are a whopper, I can tell you that. Curriculum exchanges, developing curriculum on critical thinking with the Soviet Union. All of this led to implementing the Soviet Polytech system, which is the school to work. And people could say that's not possible. It is. There was a $4 million grant to a professor that's in my book to research the Soviet Polytech system. And so what we're putting in is the failed Soviet Polytech system. And people are out there, and they're probably saying, and I really plead with my good friends in Maine or in any state, please do not sell your children short and tell me that, oh, all I care about is that my child gets a job.
Oh, wow.
Please don't tell me that anymore, because you should care about your child having access, exposure to a liberal arts curriculum, which means history and math and science and art and music.
And choosing the life he wants.
And yes, very good, what you just said, choosing the life he wants. And I had a radio interview with in Minnesota recently, and I was talking about this. It was a very good, it was an old rock and roll station, really interesting guys listening, and a lot of people wondered, you know, how I got on that. I don't know how I got on, but it was so successful. And this lady emailed me after I talked about this, and she said, you have no idea. My son was with me in the car. He's 12, and I've had a terribly hard time with him. We homeschool him, and he wants to go back to public school, and he's been miserable and all, but he heard you talking about the school to work. And he said, just what you said, he said, Mom, I want to choose my future. And you know what he did? He went, even though Congress doesn't understand the dangers of school to work, this 12-year-old went to this big rally in Minneapolis where they're trying to kill the legislation which is implementing all this restructuring. I wish we had the same thing going in Maine to kill it here. He went to the hearing at the State House, and he had a big sign which said, I want to choose my future. And I think this is great, because why is it that he at 12 understood what school to work is, but you can't get Governor McKernan when he was governor, you can't get Senator Mary Small to understand it, you can't get Jane Amero, you can't get Governor King, you can't get any of the people involved in implementing this in Maine, because they do not want to understand it. They have been given all of the documents, and I think this is so sad.
What about Olympia Snow and Susan Collins?
No, not going to do anything. And all I can say is that when they voted Goals 2000 in, and the school to work legislation in the 90s and the 80s. First of all, it was really Ronald Reagan started it. Then you had Lamar Alexander. These are all Republicans. First of all, Ted Bell was the Secretary of Education. Then you had Lamar Alexander, and then you had and Bill Bennett. All Republicans. And all of this, and then President Bush, the former President Bush, in the congressional record in my book, calls for the apprenticeship system, calls for training the children for the workforce. Then his son, of course, and then you have Clinton, who was involved in it too, all the governors involved. And then you have George Bush Jr. implementing it. His bill, the education bill that just is passing right now, is embraced by Senator Ted Kennedy. Now, if people don't understand here that we have a serious problem, the Republicans and the Democrats at the top are totally in bed together on this. And that's because they are both controlled by the internationalists. And the international agenda is this. And Strobe Talbot, who was the Undersecretary of State for Bill Clinton, in 1992, he gave a very important, he had an interview with Time magazine, I think, and he said, this is verbatim, Strobe Talbot, Rhodes Scholar, went to Oxford with Bill Clinton, very close to Clinton, ended up working for Madeleine Albright. He said, in the next century, which is right now, we're sitting here, the United States will cease to exist in its present form.
That's pretty sad.
And we will owe our allegiance to a global government. Now, I want your audience out there to understand that this restructuring of education, which has been in the works for 100 years, as I've tried to point out, is just the culmination of the plan. It has been a deliberate dumbing down. They never could have done it to us if we'd been well educated.
To make it easier to control.
Exactly. And to put us under. And we will go under if people don't wake up. And the only way that I believe the education system is the most important thing of all, because that's where the way you educate your children, their attitudes, their values, their understanding of freedom, etc., is cultivated in the schools. And if they do not have that, they're going to allow the most magnificent system, political and economic system the world has ever known, to die. And it's dying right now because Congress voted to change our form of government in the 90s when they voted in the School to Work agenda and the Goals 2000. They did, because if you change an economic system to a planned economy, there's no freedom left. In fact, the Business Alliance, it's one of these big groups. I have a document here. It takes too long to go into all these documents, but from them, and you know what it says? This is for people in your audience who think you're off the hook. Oh no, Grandma, you're not off the hook. Neither are you, Grandpa, because it's kindergarten through age 80.
That they're going to be brainwashing.
Yes, and it is on this piece of paper, kindergarten through age 80. And that is why Andy Rooney, you know, who does 60 Minutes, a couple of weeks ago, he was floating this balloon about people who aren't going to retire as early as they used to. Isn't this wonderful? Folks, you can work a little longer because you're so much healthier. They're just getting us used to that. We're going to work until we die.
Yeah, we're serfs.
And this is all documented. And this is an international plan. They have in Hong Kong, they've got OBE, they've got everything they've got in Maine.
Was it a plan then to get both families or both parents to have to work then?
Oh yes, and the Federal Reserve did that through creating, you know, inflation, deflation.
And that's to weaken the family?
They had to do that. They had to get the mom out so that they get the schools into the, I showed you that. This is just extraordinary, this little document here. This is Maine, and it's so exciting, this one, that I sent it. I had all my friends around. Maine's always in the vanguard on all of this stuff, right? Sorry, that's where your tax money is going, folks out there, you know, into doing a lot of pilot studies for the rest of the country and world, probably. Actually, the Common Core of learning that Maine has, it says in one of their documents that it's been used in 9 foreign countries. So anyway, this is called a reaffirmation of faith in Maine's public schools. And you're talking about getting rid of the family influence, et cetera. You have this, this building. It looks like a Greek temple. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns, and I'll show it to you all later, but I have to read this. One column is educational system, families, religious institutions. Isn't this interesting for the public schools to be concerned about religious institutions?
There was supposed to be a separation there.
Community, business and industry. There it is. And this is loaded. This document is loaded. And so...
so the business world wants to control us by turning us into serfs.
Oh, yes. And they want to get your children the minute they're born. And Lamar Alexander, Republican Secretary of Education and Governor, he's the one who said we want to go into the schools the minute the baby is born and follow the child.
To train them right.
That's right. And to make sure they're healthy, that's the school-based clinics. That's where you have they're bringing in the medical services into the schools.
They want healthy workers.
That's right. From the beginning, they don't want anything to go wrong, so that worker is going to be the perfect worker. They used to call it the new Soviet man in the Soviet Union. And that's exactly what's happening. And your child your child is nothing but a human resource to be used for the good of the state.
People are going to say, that's not right. People are going to say, you know, I struggled. I want my child to have a better life. They're going to get a good job. They're going to be able to provide for themselves. And I don't think people are going to see how you're seeing it. I agree with you 100%, but I don't think most people are going to see
Probably not, and that's very important, since there was a time when they could afford not to see it, right?
But they can't afford.
They can't afford not to see it any longer, and I think that something's happened. I've noticed, for instance, with my book, that the controlled left, which is Ted Kennedy and all, who take orders from the UN, and the controlled right,
Who also take orders from the UN.
Yes, the Heritage Foundation and a lot of the controlled conservative media who refuse to review my book, right? Because I am not in favor of federally funded or school choice proposals, because I know that will take over the private sector. We can go into that later. That's why they don't want to do a review of my book. But you have those two groups that are working very closely together, but they don't make up for the bulk of America. And so they won't buy my book. I mean, there's certainly some very fine Republican conservatives who've bought the book, but they are not in the controlled group. And it's the same. There's some very good liberals who bought my book, because liberals don't want this done to their children either. Mm-hmm. But in the middle, I have all these people I don't know where they're coming from. It's sort of a middle America that has been working hard, knowing something had to be wrong. I mean, how can you spend close to $100 billion a year and kids can't read? They keep saying this, what's going on? And so they are buying big time, and the book is selling like mad. We've gone into a third printing in 18 months.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and because they're documents. These people are saying—
It's proof, evidence.
What they're saying is, I don't want to listen to people, the talking heads,
right,
on Sunday morning anymore. I don't care whether it's
because
conservative
they're
or
what they're told.
That's right. I want the facts, and this book has the documents.
It has the facts.
Verbatim, and they're all cited. And
going back 100 years.
Nobody's safe. I mean, if the shoe fits, you wear it. I'm sure that, you know, the conservatives, the controlled conservatives, they didn't like it at all when they looked in the index, and they found that I had to tell the truth.
So everyone needs to buy this book and read it.
They sure do, and especially educators, and I'd say especially everybody. I think the most important people right now, because the only way we get out of this mess is to get rid of the United States Department of Education. Abolish it, totally.
That sounds pretty radical.
Bring all control back. Well, it really isn't. The radical thing is that we decided to create a Ministry of Education, which is what every single socialist country in this world has. And that was the radical thing that we did. So what we do is bring education back to the local level, bring all our money back to the local level, let our teachers determine what curriculum they feel is best for our children.
And let the family teach the values.
And let the family teach the values, and bring our education system back to the status it had prior to the 1960s. Truly, folks, it was the finest in the world. That doesn't mean that we had I mean, in Europe you have the elite, which is going to be, again, you see, this is going to be the elite. 10 or 20% will get the liberal arts, get that, because they're going to be the leaders in this wretched system. But below that, they always had the people that didn't get the education. Whereas in our country, we had an education system where everybody, supposedly, there were always gaps, that's true, but everybody was supposed to have at least exposure to ancient history. Interesting point. I'm just make this point because I love to mention it. Rockland, Maine, in the early 70s. We're talking about liberal arts, math, science, all these things. In Rockland, Maine, I got a hold of a Breasted's ancient history book. Required, 1972, required for sophomores. That's one of the finest history books that's ever been written. He is probably the most credentialed scholar in ancient history in the world. Now, I mean, since 1972, what has happened? The whole thing has collapsed. They don't want our children to be exposed to any of this. They don't want them to know history, because if you don't know history, you'll repeat those mistakes, won't you?
That's right, absolutely.
Exactly. And they want to change their attitudes and values from those that the moms and dads have tried to instill in them, so that there's no right, no wrong. Sometimes it's okay to stay.
Well, they're going to say, Charlotte, they're teaching history. What do you mean by that?
Oh, no. They're teaching global studies. They're not teaching the Maine Constitution. Certainly, I think they got rid of teaching those things quite a long time ago. And the old-time teachers, thank heavens my boys in the early 70s, before our change agent really accomplished a great deal of bad, evil stuff, I think. But those teachers were there for my children. And it was interesting. They hadn't been through, the University of Maine Teachers College and all. They were normal school or something. They didn't have all these degrees, but they knew how to teach reading and writing. The children had to have the multiplication tables. They had to draw a map of the United States. They had to name all the capitals. They had to know how much rainfall in Florida. All this they had to do. So this was the early 70s. I was very lucky. My boys were lucky. When they got into middle school and high school, things started then. We started getting into the individual education plans, which sounds so good, but you have an IEP. They have them in China, too. That's how they keep the record on the individual citizen. So they have the individual education plan for education. They started that way. Now everything's going in.
The individual education plan is just for the special ed
It used to be, but not anymore.
Oh, really?
And Kennebunkport was the first school to experiment with this, and I got a hold of it after I got out of the department because it got an award from the U.S. Department of Ed. And I got a hold of the material, and it said in there that they were putting in the IEPs, individual education plans. So the children are no longer competing with other children. They're working at their own pace. This is the real dumbing down, if you've ever heard of that. It sounds so nice. And you know, children that are wanting to work at their own pace with no competition, I never would have gotten anywhere that way. But at the time, the special education teachers were teaching or training the regular academic teachers in Kennebunkport on how to do these plans. And it said right in the book, the booklet, or the award on it, that no, it wasn't in that booklet, it was in another one I got a hold of, that the regular education teachers did not want to do this, and it was not their role to be guidance counselors and to follow the child's behavior and attitudes and all, and they did not want to be, they didn't want to have any part of IEPs.
But they had no choice.
No, and the IEP is essential if you think in terms of the computer. You see, and the IEP, because the computer can track everything that a child knows, thinks, does, whatever. And it also uses the Skinner method, which is the dog training method. It rewards immediately after you get the right answer. And that is the mastery learning or the direct instruction. So this is what went in, but my children luckily were not exposed to that. There were things changing in English at that time, but I'm very grateful that they did get the education that they got when they did, but this has all changed. And there isn't a school, I want to make it very clear, because people will say, oh, but they're not doing that in my district. Well, maybe they're not, but they're going to have to be under the new legislation that is the last nail in the coffin is right now implementing federal legislation. You will have to. And actually, Maine was one of the first to go for the school to work agenda. I think this is early 90s. The career, what's the date on this? 95. Here's the Career Opportunities 2000. State of Maine application for a statewide school to work opportunity system implementation grant. That is an unbelievable document. I'm sure they wish they hadn't given it to me. But you see, that was 1992. Now there's some states that they hadn't gotten their money until the year 2000. So Maine has always been way ahead. Governor McKernan.
That's because, so that guy, Augustus?
Yeah, could well be, and he was a good friend probably of Andrew Carnegie's, who knows, because it was the same period of time. And then along came Maine's Common Core of Learning, which, you know, if you look through this thing, it has absolutely nothing to do with academics, but we have to understand that the semantic deception. I'd like to talk about
the three prongs?
Yeah, a good way to remember this, the three-prong fork, because I don't want your audience, or anybody for that matter, to feel like they were asleep at the switch. But I really don't think I think even if you'd been awake at the switch, you would not have been able to notice how this was done. And I think it's a very diabolical, manipulative way. They used the three-prong fork. And the first prong is everybody knows about the frog in the cold water.
You slowly turn up the heat, and he doesn't notice he's being cooked.
That's right.
And that's what's been happening to us.
That's right. We're just about cooked now.
Okay.
But we have people like you, and we have a lot of wonderful people out there who I think are waking up, and the book is helping a lot. But so the gradualism, the frog was probably thrown in the cold water around 1910. You know.
Oh, wow. So it was a very slow cook.
Yes, slow cook. But 1934 was the watershed year. That's when the water got pretty hot. With Carnegie saying we're going to use the schools to change America from a free individualistic economy to a socialist, collectivist, planned economy in believe it or not, the New World Order. And you have to remember the quote from Strobe Talbot in 1992. He certainly knew this had been going on for a long time, and so did Bill Clinton. So anyway, you have the gradualism. And there's a marvelous quote in there from a leading change agent in the Montgomery County School Plan out of Maryland in that plan was what was that? That was 48, I think. Yeah. Paul Mort came down from New York City, change agent, into Montgomery County, Maryland, and implemented the plan for the whole country. That's in here. And at the time, he said, it takes 50 years to bring about change.
Charlotte, I just want to let you know you have 5 minutes to get this all in.
Okay, so it took 50 years. We're right there, right on target. So that was the gradualism. And the Paul Mort stuff is in there. And the Montgomery County plan, incredible. So then came the next prong in your fork. You're all going out gardening, so you must have a 3-prong fork, don't you?
Yes, I do.
I think I see them, yes. And so the next one is the dialectic, and I know that sounds like a big word and it's complicated, but it really isn't at all. And you want something. Say you want to control the local schools in Maine, and you don't know how to do that because everybody wants to hold on to their, elected officials and all this and that and make their own decisions. Well, you just get the costs of education going so high that the property tax is out the window and everybody starts screaming. The old people have to move from their houses, etc. So what do? They did it in Michigan. They tried to do it in Maine and it didn't really work. We fought it. But in Michigan they did it. They came to the people of the community and said, well, you know what, don't worry anymore. You don't have to fund education at the local level. We'll take care of that at the state level. This will bring your property tax down. They fell for it.
So they create a crisis so they can come in and save the day, and people are desperate saying, okay.
That's right, okay. That funding of education is a very important one there. So that you could use it with anything, like the California crisis in electricity.
But the funding of education is the control.
Oh, yes,
as long as we allow the federal funding,
that's right,
we're being controlled.
Yeah. And the minute you move your local funding to the state level, the state level takes its orders from the federal level. State departments of education get up to 80% of their operating budget from my old office in Washington. So that means Augusta, when we get rid of the Department of Education, Augusta's going to crash because they won't have any money to operate. All right, now we go from the dialectic to semantic deception, which the use of terms like basic skills. Basic skills to the average parent means reading, writing, and arithmetic, etc. To them, basic skills is understanding the need for world government. It's getting along with any lifestyle, approving of it, being tolerant of anything.
So they have different definitions.
Oh yes, different definitions, and this is really bad that they've used this. So for instance,
2 minutes.
Okay, 2 minutes. Values clarification was changed to critical thinking when we caught on. Also decision making. I always say, what parent doesn't want their child to be able to make decisions? Right. That is a program I would say, hooray. No, you know what it is? Decision making is making a decision who's going to be allowed in the lifeboat and who's going to be thrown in the ice water. And that is what happened at Columbine. This philosophy has created children who do not understand. They're out on a ship without a rudder, they're without a compass, because these values destroying programs, which are in that big red book.
Values destroying programs.
Yes.
I think people need to remember
brought
that.
About Columbine. And the talking heads, you hear them Sunday morning say, well, what are we going to do about our children? And what happened with these Columbine and Paducah, Kentucky? Why are they doing this? And I say, why not? Why not even more? The reason we don't have more is because there are still good teachers who are refusing to participate in this kind of education. And I plead with people not to fall for the school choice proposals. There is no school choice proposal that is legitimate or safe, as far as I've seen, except for homeschooling. And be very careful, don't accept anything from the local school system. If you do, computers or money or anything, you will be controlled. And so but tuition tax credits or vouchers are very dangerous. France went down the tube with tuition tax credits. If you accept a penny from the federal government, you're going to have to conform your curriculum, your standards, your graduation requirements, etc., to the federal government, which is actually the international government.
Charlotte, what's the name of your group in Maine?
Oh, we no longer exist, actually, because the wonderful president of it is not well, but it was Guardians of Education for Maine, and we were in existence for 23 years, and we did quite a lot of good, but I think our time is sort of past.
Is it on a website, or is it the website's off too?
I think it may have a website. Yes, GEM, Guardians of Education for Maine. .org or .com, but people should get my website. That's what I need. Yeah.
Okay, Charlotte, thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching. Now, you've got to get Charlotte's book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. Remember, federal funding is going to destroy your child's life, basically.
Exactly.
Okay? Call up Charlotte if you have any questions, you want to educate yourself about exactly what's happening. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.